In this video, we will finish connecting the model, the player class, to the view model, the main window class. There's one more thing we need to do so that the view gets updated anytime something changes on the player, the model object. To see what the problem is, I added this button to our player stats. Now when I click this button, it's going to run a function called button-based-on-click, which is in the code behind page for the XAML file. And what this function is going to do is it's going to take the player's current experience points, add 10 to it, and put that into the player's experience points. Every time we click this button, the player should get 10 more experience points. But when we run the program, I click the button and we don't see anything happen. The experience points are still 0. The problem is, even though we've set the data context here so the view knows what the view model is and knows what the model is, it doesn't know when anything gets updated. The way the view gets notified is through something called the PropertyChanged event. And the way the PropertyChange event works is through an interface. So far we've talked about a user interface, the actual screen for the game. But this is something else. This interface defines the properties and functions that must exist in any class that implements the interface. In this case, the interface that we want the classes to implement is called INotify PropertyChanged. When a view data binds with a class that implements INotify PropertyChanged, then it knows it needs to listen for any possible changes of the property's values. Let's go into the player class and I'll show you how it gets built. So what we need to do is make this player class implement INotify PropertyChanged. That means anytime one of these properties changes, the experience points, the gold, the hit points, the player object is going to say, hey, I've got a new value. If there are any other classes that care about that property, they need to update their value. The way we implement an interface is go up here where we say public class player, then type space, colon, and then INotify PropertyChanged. This is a built-in interface. It's very common, and this is one that we use whenever we want a class to notify other classes if its properties have changed. We get a red line here because we don't have all the functions and properties and events that this requires. I'll paste in the required code and explain what it does. Now the red line has gone away because we implement everything that INotify PropertyChanged requires. In this case, it's only two things. We need to have a public event called PropertyChanged, and we need to have this function here called onPropertyChanged. We're going to go into events more in some later lessons when we build our own custom events. But basically this says if anybody is listening to our PropertyChanged event handler, we need to send them a message that this property has changed. So now we need to add in some more code to actually raise this event whenever one of these properties does get changed. Where that code needs to be called is in the set. So if we set the experience points to a new value, we need to call this onPropertyChanged function to send up the message, to send its notification. But right now, the experience points property is an auto property, so we don't have any way we can do something when the value gets set. What we need to do is change this to a property with a backing value. That means instead of having this automatically get and set values to the property, we're going to store it to another variable. In this case, I'll make a private int called experience points. I like to name my private variables with an underscore and then starting in lowercase. You may have a different naming pattern, but the important thing is to be consistent. So now we need to change this property to use this variable. So I'll say For the get, we're going to return the experience points variable. And on the set, take whatever value we were trying to set the experience points property to and set it to the underscore experience points variable. So now in our game session code, when we have the line current player.experience points equals 0, what's going to happen is this 0 value is going to go to the setter. We'll take the value, the 0 that was passed in, and save that in the private underscore experience points variable. Then whenever we look at the experience points property, when we get a value from it, we're going to return that underscore experience points variable value. It adds an extra step, but it does give us the ability to insert some extra code here in our set or in our get. And what we need to do now is in the setter, when we change the value, we also have to raise the property changed event. And the way we do that is by adding another line in the setter and say on property changed, and then we need the property name, which is experience points, and it's the uppercase E because it's the actual property name. So what this is going to do, if we look back at game session, we say current player.experience points equals 0, so we're going to pass 0 into this property. It's going to go to the setter. It will take the 0 value, put it in the private backing variable, the underscore experience points, and then it will call this onPropertyChanged function with the experience points name. This function will take the property name, and if anybody is listening for properties that are changed on the player class, it will say, hey, the experience points have changed. You need to update something. And let's take a look what happens now if I run the program and click the Add Experience Points button. Now we see the experience points in the UI increasing. Because the XAML UI, when it does its data binding, it knows this player object implements the INotify property changed event, and I'll listen to any property changed events so I can update the user interface. I'll change the player class so that all the properties have backing variables and all of them call the property changed event. That way, as the player gets more gold, we'll see their gold increase. As they increase in levels, we'll see that increase. When they fight and they lose hit points or they heal, we'll see their hit points change. I'll make that change and show you the new code. Now all the properties in the player class have these private backing variables. And when you get the value for any of the properties, it returns the value from the backing variable. And if you set the property to a new value, it saves it to the backing variable, and it also raises the onNotify property changed event with the property name. This is a very common technique for objects, for models and view model objects, to notify the user interface, the view, that some values have been changed and it needs to do some updating. You can also do this for other types of events. For example, when the player fights a monster, if the player kills the monster, we could raise an event that says, you've won the battle, and here's the experience points you get, here's the gold you get, here are the loot items from the monster. So these events can be much more complex. And we're going to create our own custom events that have a lot of game information that gets passed in the notifications. By the way, you may sometimes hear this technique called the publish and subscribe method, or the pub-sub design pattern, because basically this player model object is publishing some information, it's publishing an event, and the UI is subscribing to this onPropertyChanged event, so it gets the notification of the change. That's the final step for this binding routine. So now we can go on to make some more classes for the location and for the monsters and for the game items, which we'll do in the next video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below or at the support page, and a link for that will be in the description. Thanks.